Welcome to our podcast series Struck by Science, organized by Polish Academy of Sciences Scientific Center in Vienna. In this podcast, we are aiming to start a discussion on the interesting socio-political issues from a scientific perspective. My name is Sonia Horonziak, and I'm a specialist for scientific contacts at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Vienna. And today we are going to discuss the subject that influenced the life of many. Parents, children, and students were forced to face a great change when it comes to the educational system and organize their life around the new form of education, that is, distance learning. And it all happened during the difficult time of pandemic. Before the global pandemic, homeschooling was understood somehow differently. Usually, we've had some percentage of school-age children who were schooled at home or at a variety of places other than school. It was usually conducted by a parent, tutor, or an online teacher with the use of different schooling techniques, often more personalized. In many countries, it was treated as an alternative form of education. For example, in Poland, according to the official Polish Act on the Education System, children are allowed to be educated at home with the consent of the headmaster of the school where the child is enrolled. Therefore, parents and legal guardians can make decisions about the purpose and quality of education of their children. Of course, the students are still required to pass classification exams after each year of study. Nowadays, however, we have a different situation. The type of schooling that was only undertaken by, for example, in Poland, nearly 0.3% of all children going to school, now that number rose to 100. So, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, in different time frames, schools were closed, forcing children and parents to organize school in a form of distance learning. Also, the whole education system must have been adjusted to this type of schooling. And understandably, it rose many questions, doubts, and problems. And about them and many other issues surrounding the subject of distance learning, I would like to talk today with a special guest. Julia Holzer is university assistant and doctoral candidate at the Department for Psychology of Development and Education at the University of Vienna. She graduated with distinction from her master's degree in applied psychology, focusing on work, education, and economy. She studied at the University College of Teacher Education Vienna and taught for 4 years at the secondary school in Vienna. She was also a student project assistant in the project Third Mission of the University of Vienna and a tutor at the Center for Teacher Education. Her research interests include well-being in the school context, educational motivation and goal orientation of teachers and pupils, implementation science, and knowledge transfer. Ms. Holzer, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be invited to the podcast.
Thank you so much to be with us here today. And before we came to the main subject of our discussion, I would like to ask you to explain the current educational situation in Austria. That is, how was it before the COVID-19 pandemic and how is it now? Now, what changed in case of form of education?
Well, the Austrian education itself has not much changed, I would say, during the pandemic. Most of the children attended school regularly before, and they do attend school regularly also nowadays. However, of course, there is a percentage of children who are in home learning. This is, I think, currently most of them. I think they are now in shift learning, but next week it will change and they will go to school every day. However, of course, there were school closings, as in many other countries during the pandemic. However, schools were always open when care was needed, and there have always been and still are services for children with special difficulties. But in different phases of the pandemic, there were different percentages of children who went there physically.
Of course. So basically, there are many children who are basically having the distance learning change from this typical going to school to distance learning, with of course some exceptions. And you are also a part of the research team that conducts learning under COVID-19 conditions research. Can you tell us a little bit more about those studies? What are they, and what is their main purpose?
Yeah. So when schools were first closed in March 2020, we decided as a research group that it would be important to somehow monitor this situation because this is some kind of a natural experiment where children from one day to the other have to completely change the setting of their education, and they were forced to cope with a new situation, at the same time continue their education. So for us, it was important that it is somehow monitored how it works for children, not only in terms of the learning, but also in terms of their well-being and their motivation to continue learning, facing this difficult situation.
Of course, and as you've mentioned, this is a situation that affected, of course, children, students, but also parents and teachers. But maybe starting with students, what do you believe, maybe what do you gather from your research, from your experience, are the main challenges considering this abruptly switching into the new form of education, such as distance learning?
I think this doesn't only apply to school children, but to everybody, that due to the pandemic, everybody was deprived in their basic psychological needs. And there are three basic human needs. These are the needs for competence, so for experiencing oneself as competent to experiencing successes. Then there's the need for autonomy. This is something that was quite deprived in the pandemic because people were not able to autonomously decide what to do each day. There was a loss of control in many respects. And the third need is the need for social relatedness. So to experience oneself as connected to other people and to people who are important for ourselves. So this need was also quite challenged because it was not allowed to meet people. And these needs, they are also can be interpreted in terms of their contextuality, because educational systems or educational contexts, they provide opportunities for school children to experience these needs to be satisfied. So in school, you have the possibility to experience yourself as successful or as competent if you deal with your schoolwork. This was deprived because it was harder to experience successes in these new circumstances. There were technical issues, maybe. It was a very abrupt change in terms of how teachers were able to address the learners' needs. So competence experience was challenged. On the one hand, autonomy was also challenged because it was not possible anymore to decide on one's own what to do when. So there was a loss of control, as I already mentioned before. But on the other hand, there was an overwhelming amount for some children also to handle that autonomy, because if you have a lot of tasks and maybe teachers only email you your task that you have to do, then you have a certain amount of things that you need to do, but nobody actually helps you with structuring that. School has an important task of also structuring learning for children, and it's not so easy for every child in the same way to cope with that loss of structure. So you might have autonomy, but you might not be able to deal with that. This is also deprivation in autonomy. And of course, not being able to meet your friends in person, not being able to see your teachers, is deprivation in experience of social relatedness. So these basic psychological needs, they are strongly related to well-being and also to learning motivation. This is also what we consistently found in our research.
Yes, this is the thing that I wanted to ask you, because in one of your articles you are discussing widely this subject of self-regulated learning, that some children have it and some children don't. What is it? How does it affect this feeling of structure or lack of it? Could you please tell me a little bit more about it?
So self-regulated learning is actually now this key between the basic psychological needs and well-being and motivation. Because if you can self-regulate your learning, if you know how to organize stuff, if you know where to get help, then it is actually also possible to experience these feelings of competence and autonomy, even though there is a pandemic. So self-regulated learning is actually nothing that you have or you do not have, but it is actually a competence of structuring your learning, how to deal with the resources you have, maybe also to think about what you can do if you have a problem. So it's also problem solving skills and planning included.
And you mentioned that this is some kind of competence that you have or not, but can it be learned or like worked?
It's actually not something that you have or you do not have, but something you can learn. And we actually strongly recommend that teachers should emphasize that. We have in our research group, self-regulated learning has always been a topic, but oftentimes students, they don't feel that they need to self-regulate their learning, because actually in school you always have the teacher who helps you structuring your tasks and your day and your learning. So you might not need it, but the pandemic showed that it is actually something that is you cannot cope with the situation without being able to self-regulate learning. So many school children and also university students, they actually experienced that how important it was to self-regulate the learning, and that it was an important investment also to engage in these strategies.
And this article on self-regulated learning also mentioned that younger students need more support in case of distance learning. Uh, can you tell us what new challenges for parents, teachers, and of course for those children, for those students, it poses in the face of compulsory distance learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So self-regulated learning also encompasses the aspect of metacognition. So to think about what you are doing, planning. These are strategies that are easier to apply for older students. So adolescents, maybe from, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years, you can actually expect that you can teach them these strategies, and then they will be able to apply it autonomously. But for smaller children, like primary school children, maybe also 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, they need much more structure and much more help. So they need maybe also a daily routine. And this is something that we would recommend that parents or teachers also help them with. Because once it is established, then it will be there and it will be helpful. But they need some input and they need some initial tip to have these routines and these plans.
And another thing regarding the children at homes is the lack of motivation to continue to study. Because, as you mentioned, the children also need this sense of completion or satisfaction from learning. And is there a way to increase the motivation of distance learning school children?
Yeah, so there are several theories that can be applied, I think, from in terms of educational psychology. One is, of course, this theory of the basic psychological needs. If your basic needs for competence, autonomy, and social relatedness are met in the context where you study or where you learn, then you naturally will be intrinsically motivated. So if you are related, or if you feel related with your schoolmates, for example, if you feel that you work together on something, then, and if you feel as part of a community, then their motivation will be higher. Also, if you are able to deal with the autonomy that you have, if you if learning arrangements fit to your abilities, then you will experience yourself as competent. And these things need to be considered, and if they are considered, then children will stay motivated. This is what research shows us.
Of course, and from one point we have this motivation, but of course from the other point we have procrastination. And we all know it, we all faced it, not only children but also adults. But in one of your articles, it was also mentioned that we can differentiate this phenomenon. We can differentiate it into active and passive procrastination. What is it and how it affects the ability of successful learning?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting topic. So procrastination means that you delay your tasks, and delaying tasks might be a bad thing because you might not be able to fulfill your potentials because you will be in a hurry. Your work might not be of the same quality. You might even forget to do it, and it makes you feel bad. But on the other hand, if a task is too easy for us, sometimes we delay it not because we are not able to do it, but it is maybe too boring for us. And humans like to be in a state of flow. Flow means that you are adequately, how to say, it means that your abilities fit the challenges. And if this fit is achieved, then you enjoy doing this task. You might even lose track of time. So when you have a very easy task, a very monotonous work, people sometimes naturally delay these tasks in order to be in a hurry and to have a challenge to fulfill it. And then they will be in a state of flow when they engage in that task. And this is considered adaptive or active procrastination, meaning that you are still able to fulfill what you are asked to do, but you do not do it maybe immediately after you get assigned the task. But this is not bad. It might even be some kind of maybe a thrill or something for you. And the other thing, maladaptive procrastination or passive procrastination is the form of procrastination where you maybe are overwhelmed with a task, where you do not know what to do or you do not know how to start because it's too hard. And then you delay it until it's maybe also too late. And in the end, you won't have the time to think of how to maybe use your resources, or you won't have time to plan adequately how to make the best out of it. And this is passive procrastination.
Well, so let's hope we all only going to have this active one. And maybe one last thing surrounding students, pupils, because the problems with distance learning are also purely technical ones. Because, of course, we can all imagine that, yes, all children want to only sit in front of computer, but it's hardly to believe that it's true when it comes to being forced to spend a couple of hours a day before a computer, listening to some lectures or doing some exercises. So, but of course, it's only an assumption. So, from your scientific perspective, how is it and how this technical compulsory education might maybe be a problem when it comes to distance learning?
Yeah. So maybe as a first remark, what interestingly, in all of our studies, these technical components were less important for motivation or well-being, even for procrastination, than our psychological variables, such as competence experience, autonomy experience, or relatedness, for example. But still, of course, it is an issue, and it is maybe more a prerequisite for learning than an important how to say yeah, independent variable in terms of, well, scientifically speaking. But of course, it's an issue, and I think, and also what we found in our studies is that it is a matter of balance. So in the very beginning, when schools first closed, there were actually not so many face to face not, but synchronous learning arrangements like live video calls, for example. Children were predominantly assigned tasks via email, maybe also via learning platforms. But this changed. More and more platforms were then used. And in autumn, we actually saw that many children had live classes online the whole day. And this was too much screen time. So in our studies, school children complained about sitting in front of the computer all day long, to have to listen to teachers, and then afterwards doing their tasks. And I think it was a matter of getting this balance, to have live classes, to get in touch personally, but also to have tasks that you do in your own time, and where you can also maybe have some things that you can autonomously also decide on, where do you want to spend more time with the task, or what to omit, maybe where to have your special focus on. So individualization, I think, is a topic for distance learning, and it is actually closely related to how it is implemented technically.
And about this, because of course we talk a lot about this negative or challenging effects of distance learning, but I believe that there must be some positive sides, maybe with a little bit of work put into the process of implementing the distance learning. Because after all, homeschooling is also a voluntary form of education that some parents willingly choose for their children, and it is often a successful one. So, from your experience, what are the positive aspects, or what could be the positive aspects of distance learning?
Yeah, we actually asked that question also the participants in our study. So, for example, what they learned from this phase, or what are the benefits. And they actually said that they engaged more and more in these self-regulated learning strategies, and they know now better how to plan their tasks, what to do when something is maybe difficult for them, how to solve their problems on their own. So they learn to structure learning, and this is really, really important also in terms of lifelong learning. Now in school, you are used to teachers structuring your learning, but later on in university, but also in adult life, if you want to learn something new, you have to do it yourself, and you have to structure it yourself. And this is a really important competence in terms of lifelong learning. And this is some benefit, I think, of the pandemic. And I think it is a benefit that teachers and also school children were like forced to use different platforms and engage in digital learning. And these things, so in the first place, it's competences to be able to to deal with the technical requirements on the one hand, but on the other hand, it makes you flexible for education after the pandemic. Individualized learning is something that is not only important now, but is always important. And digital learning tools, they enable to offer individualized learning arrangements, but teachers as well as pupils need to be able to handle that. And this is certainly a learning output from this situation. For the topic of deliberately choose to home learning, so children being taught by, for example, their guardians, or some teacher, parents choose, and then passing maybe exams to prove that they meet the requirements that the country, for example, has for children. I think it's not so easily comparable, because the education provided now in distance learning is still some institutionalized education. It is still the school who structures learning, well, not in the same way as it was before, but they still decide what is done. And children are still in a community. They are still in a classroom, even though they do not see their colleagues or classmates. They still have their class where they are affiliated. So I think it's of course the setting, learning from home, is something that is that is similar to this form, but it's not the parent or the guardian who is responsible for the learning. It's still the teacher and the school.
And about the teachers, I would also like to raise this topic because in face-to-face classroom, we have those highly motivated students and not highly motivated students. We have the ones with the different set of skills. And it is already a challenge for a teacher, like the present teacher, to motivate the students all equally or to get a grip around the class. But maybe from your experience, could you tell me, is it more difficult to do so when it comes to distance learning?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of implementation. So, as you also said in the introduction, I was a teacher myself for 4 years. Of course, not during the pandemic. Luckily, I'm actually glad that I'm not a teacher now, and I really, I really appreciate what teachers are doing now, and I. Yeah, it was easier for me, I think, when I was a teacher in normal days. Um, and I actually think that if you implement it accordingly, you have now a lot of opportunities to provide children with individualized learning arrangement. So normally in a classroom, you have 50 minutes, and most of the times there is not so much flexibility allowed. So you give them tasks, children have their tasks, they might be different or there might be some kind of individualization involved. But whenever you, for example, go to some child and help with something or provide feedback, then you have to talk, and then everybody else is not, everybody else has to be listening. And you cannot really help in an intense way because you do not want to disturb anybody else. And also when they are doing something and somebody is done and some other child takes longer, then you have to come up with some other idea. So I think it's actually quite difficult to meet everybody's needs in this face-to-face 50-minute classroom settings. And if children are learning from home, you can give them something and everybody does it in their own speed. And you as a teacher, you might even offer time slots, for example, for feedback that is more personal, and you do not disturb anybody who is working. And also when children are working on their assignments at home, they do not know, am I the slowest person or am I the fastest? So it is easier for them to work on, based on, and as well to experience their success based on their own learning and not so much as a comparison to their classmates. And I think this is also something beneficial. But I think these learning arrangements that work well have to be you have to think, as a teacher, you have to think about how to best use the situation to make the most out of it.
Yes, because teachers actually have this power to, as you said, thanks to the distance learning, to provide like more personalized education to the children. But of course, there are voices that during this distance learning time in many countries, the solution of to find a new form of motivation for teachers was just to give more homework. And this was something that was rise for children that actually decreased their motivation to participate in the classes. And why do you believe that happened? Like, how does this more homework could or could not be beneficial to children?
Yeah, I think that I think it's two things. So one thing is that in the beginning everybody was quite overwhelmed and just tried to do something. So it was not so maybe so important what tasks children were assigned as long as they did something. And then well, this was an issue, I think, while these technical things were not so much developed, which has changed. And the second thing is that that you constantly hear this issue of this is a lost generation. Children do not learn so many things as if they were at school physically. So everybody is afraid that children now are not as well educated as maybe the last generation, or yeah. So they try to compensate perhaps this time with many tasks, but what they do not see is that oftentimes it's not about the quantity but about the quality. So this is one aspect. I think that it is maybe important to focus on what's really important and to make the most out of it. And the second thing is also to emphasize the abilities of self-regulation, because if you are not self-regulated, you can have as many tasks as possible. You won't be able to deal with it properly. You might be frustrated more and more because you don't know how to approach these things. So this is about, I think, teaching the competences to cope with new challenges. This should be a crucial part of education, also during the pandemic. And the issue of compensating things that were not taught in class, I actually think that it is also the responsibility of the government, or of the or maybe the Ministry for Education, or those people who are decision makers, to communicate that. So they have to they have to decide now that some things we just have to accept, that some things do not work as well as before. So we adapt our strategy and our plan, what we want to do. And it has already been done in in Austria with the Matura. So it was decided that oral exams can be omitted. And I think this is one step in the right direction, that we just now decide, okay, there are now challenges, and everybody who keeps up their motivation, and everybody who still has not given up is actually a winner and has achieved something. So we do not need to worry about the lost generation. And I actually really don't like this saying of a lost generation, because it is also a self-fulfilling prophecy. It turns to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you keep telling people you are the lost generation, you have not achieved as much as the generation before, then people or school children, they won't be motivated to prove them wrong, because it has been established.
I think you are completely right, because it is the case of many parties. Like, we have teachers, we have parents, we have children, but we cannot expect from everyone to adjust to the situation like in a moment. We also need, as you're saying, maybe some governmental solutions to help also teachers who are facing with a great challenge. They cannot change anything just in a moment, but can help for children to adjust to the new situation, but only if they are also supported in this situation. And maybe a little bit about the third side, actually, of this distance learning triangle, that is, besides of students, besides of teachers, we are, of course, having parents. And we always seem to hear that engaging into the child's education is a good thing, is a positive thing. But actually, during this distance learning challenge, we've heard some voices that parents often exceed their powers and, for example, trying to help too much. That is, for example, pass the exams for children. Like in Poland, that was this case of the famous mathematical contest, Kangur, it named. And before the pandemic, only 8 children on the given level passed this contest without the mistake. During the pandemic, this number magically rose to 3,000. And of course, it was a suspicion, but from the other side, we cannot say, I believe we cannot say that parents should just leave their children be. Because as you said, there are some types of children that really need help in developing this self regulation. So my question to you is, what would you advise to those parents? How should they actually engage into the education of their children if they're actually sitting in home right now while having the education in the form of distance learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's quite understandable that every parent wants the best for their child. Yeah, it's funny to hear about that story from this mathematics exam or competition. Um, we might not have so much evidence for what actually happened, but yeah, as you said, teachers, parents want the best for their children, and they want to help, they want to support, and sometimes they might yeah how to say
Maybe overstep their
exaggerate.
boundaries a
Yeah,
little
maybe
bit more.
overstep the boundaries,
Yeah.
exaggerate a little bit, but yeah, sometimes it's not so easy to know where the border is, where's the red line, what is help and what is already something more. And but the tips or the recommendations that I would now suggest, they are actually not so very different from what I would suggest parents to do in normal times. So I think it's really important that parents show their interest in their child's education, and to to just ask them, what did you learn today? How was it for you? What did you find interesting? Just to show that they are interested in what the child does, but to trust that the child does their best. So parents should not try to find what children were not doing so well. They should just show their interest, I would say, in like the typical conversation. But yeah, this is maybe for I don't know, just talk over dinner or breakfast, maybe just to talk about it in a very relaxed way. As for situations where parents like engage in learning support, I would also recommend the parent to work on these meta strategies. So, for example, not ask the child in the first place, where are the mistakes that you made, or what went wrong, but just to start with, what are the goals for today? How difficult do you think this task might be for you? How much time do you therefore need to block maybe for that task? And maybe not in the first place to work on getting things that are hard to get them done, but maybe to search for strategies with the child to do it themselves, or to find the solutions on their own. So not to come up with the solutions on side of the parent, in terms of, for example, I don't know, if there's a task in mathematics and the child is not able to do it, not immediately try to solve it for the child and show them the solution, but to help the child find a way to come up with a solution. Maybe, where do you need to look for the hint, or what is the point of this task that is challenging for you, and then try to find together the hint for that. So try. So this is the recommendation. Try not to solve it for your child, but to help the child to find the solution on its own.
Actually, I suddenly remember all these times when my father was sitting with me and tried to fight with me against this mathematical task. And I can surely say that both me and him failed completely. Yeah. And maybe the last question, actually something about on the border of the science and maybe a little bit of prediction, because switching to distance learning was for sure an unexpected turn of events due to the world pandemic. It was met with positive as well as negative responses. So, what do you believe is the future of distance learning? Should we treat it just as the temporal side effect of the pandemic, or can we learn from it and maybe adapt it to the educational system after the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think there are different ways to deal with that. And worst case scenario for me would be that people are like glad it's over and never talk about it again. This would be totally worst case. I think that it's really important to think about what went in a good way. What are the learnings in terms of what did teachers learn, what did pupils learn, but also what did the system learn? I think the pandemic showed us very well the points where our weaknesses are in the system, also in terms of where are the children that we might even have a little bit lost. So who were the children who were not so easily reached by their teachers? Also, why is that? How can we support them? And also, yeah, what can we learn from all these new technical solutions? What can be helpful also in an ordinary educational setting to use these tools for individualized learning, and not to forget these things. This is, I think, this would be the best case scenario, where we can really use this now as a motor for creating chances to enhance competences also for lifelong learning on the long run.
Thank you so much for this answer. And actually, thank you so much for the whole discussion. I believe that distance learning is a phenomenon that is worth researching because, as we discussed, it affects the lives of many. I hope that our audience can agree to that to be able to solve any issues in this subject, we have to just better understand it. And I believe we made it possible at least in small aspect. Of course, thank you to my guest today. My guest today was, of course, Julia Holzer from the Department for Psychology of Development and Education at the University of Vienna. Ms. Holzer, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And this was the episode of Struck by Science, podcast organized by the Polish Academy of Sciences Scientific Center in Vienna. So stay tuned for the more episodes. Bye!